Is the threat of war in the middle of Europe receding or simply at a lull? Russia says it's drawing down the troops massed at Ukraine's border. The West is skeptical. With the forces and weapons it still has in place, Russia retains the ability to launch a full-fledged invasion, according to NATO. Yet President Putin says he's ready to give diplomacy a chance. It fell to Germany's Chancellor to decipher the mixed messages as he visited the Kremlin. Putin's poker. Everybody loses? Welcome to the Point. Here are our guests. Alexander Rahr heads the Russian Industry Association in Germany, and he publishes frequently on Russian issues. His opinion? Scholz would like to do more of his own Russian policy in Moscow, but the US and the UK are forcing him to abide by the transatlantic consensus. It's also a pleasure to welcome Regina Heller. She is a conflict researcher at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy. And she says finding a new security architecture for Europe that is equitable for all stakeholders is like squaring a circle. And I'm very pleased to greet my colleague from Deutsche Welle, Roman Goncharenko. He's in our Ukraine department, and he says Russia has given the West and Ukraine more time to raise the white flag. War is still possible. And he joins us from Bonn. Regina, everybody's been holding their breath following those U.S. intelligence-based predictions that an invasion was imminent. It hasn't happened so far. Instead, Russia says it's pulling back some of its troops. Are you seeing signs of that within your research organization? Are you seeing evidence that the de-escalation is real?
What we saw is a little bit of a breathtaking over the last days. But in general, I think we are not through it at all. We are seeing no significant withdrawal of troops from the Ukraine borders. So I think, yes, there is a chance for talking, or the politicians have created a chance for talking, but the situation is still very tense.
So was the U.S. warning then really indicating invasion was quite imminent? Was that a mistake, or do you think it was a tactic?
It was probably both, a mix of it. I guess there were indeed signs, or the intelligence services had signs that something might happen. Probably the date wasn't correct, or we don't know. They won't tell us anyway, I think. But I think it created some pressure on Putin, or it created something where Putin had to react, or was turned into a defensive position. But it was probably more a present to Bundeskanzler Scholz for his visit in Moscow.
Alexander, the U.S., Europe, and NATO have been at pains to communicate quite clearly and directly that an invasion would have a very high cost. Could that strategy be one reason why President Putin is now claiming he's going to show restraint, even to the point that he and his foreign minister went on TV in a rather staged dialogue affirming that they are ready to give diplomacy a chance?
No, these are what you are saying, Western, American, British arguments and narrative, which I do not believe. I think that Putin reckoned with this kind of reaction from the West. I think we have seen the demonstration of force. The military built up the border to Ukraine from the Russian side. And from the Western side, a clear sign that sanctions will be very strong, directed against the Russian economy, against the Russian financial system, and Russia will cut off of the West. But now I think we are seeing we're seeing a new phase of talks, of strategic talks, and maybe a kind of solution.
So, in other words, you don't think that Russia has in any way been impressed by the Western threats or Western resolve?
No, I think Russia has had Plan A. Plan A is over. Now Russia has a Plan B. That means that Russia may the maximum what it's got to do is to recognize separatist republics, like Russia did in the Georgian War and 12 years ago. But Russia has also forced at least part of the West, the Germans and the French, and I would also say the Americans, in serious negotiations about the kind of correction of the European security system.
And both of those points we want to drill a bit deeper on later on. Roman, you say that Putin has given the West and Ukraine simply more time to, as you put it, raise the white flag. So you don't think, I guess, that Russia's claimed pullback is real?
No, I don't think so. And the reason why is the press conference we saw between President Putin and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Moscow. During that press conference, President Putin seemed to be in very good spirits, and he said several times that we are not backing down on our key demands, and the key demands are no further enlargement of NATO, no heavy weapons along Russian borders, and so on. So these are key issues. And he said, well, maybe we are ready to talk with the West and with NATO on certain issues like disarmament and arms control, but we are not ready to discuss that a part of the whole package. So he sticked to his key points, and that's why I think Russia will not back down. So we are not over this crisis yet, and I think we will see more tensions in the coming days and weeks.
Okay, regarding that white flag that you mentioned, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK appeared recently to suggest that Ukraine's NATO ambitions might be negotiable. And President Zelensky also said that membership is a quote-unquote far-off dream. In fact, he did so while he was meeting with German Chancellor Scholz. Is that the white flag that Russia has been looking for?
Not quite. I think it's much bigger than Ukraine. It's about NATO and the West as a unity, and Russia. It's about coexistence of two different systems. Some in Russia would say of two different civilizations. And I think we have to understand it, because it's a much bigger contest. It's not just Ukraine. Speaking about Ukraine, I think, yes, of course, Putin would be happy to hear that Kiev is considering giving up its NATO dream. But I think this is not enough. And I think we can only talk about it if Russia is ready to give certain guarantees to Ukraine. And those guarantees are very thin, I would say, after the annexation of Crimea and after what happened in eastern Ukraine. The war is ongoing there.
Yes, and I want to come back to that in just a moment. That statement by President Zelensky that I mentioned was made during a press conference with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who went to Kiev on Monday and Moscow on Tuesday, a delicate mission for a leader who's been criticized for doing too little to support Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Zelensky is expecting arms deliveries from Germany, but Chancellor Scholz continues to refuse the request. Instead, he has warm words of solidarity for Ukraine and a firm stance towards Vladimir Putin. I'm making it clear here in Kiev that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine are non-negotiable for Germany. That is why we expect clear steps from Russia to de-escalate the current tensions. Before meeting with Scholz, Putin hinted at de-escalation. He has withdrawn a small portion of his army from Ukrainian border areas. But in his 4-hour conversation with Scholz, he again insisted on his actual goals. Do we want war? Of course not. That is why we have proposed to continue the negotiation process. This should lead to an agreement that provides equal security for all sides, including ours. Will Putin end up getting what he wants, even without a war?
What's your take on that, Regina? What does Putin want? We just heard a couple of other interpretations. I'd like to get your point of view. And can he realize his goals without a full-fledged invasion?
That depends. I mean, the ball is now in the Ukraine's part. They were asked to deliver some laws on the status of Donbas and to prepare
in eastern Ukraine.
And to prepare elections there. This is part of the Minsk agreement.
The Minsk agreement, just for our viewers, signed in 2015 as a way to try to address fighting in eastern Ukraine, has been stalled for quite some time, but those talks just recently now reactivated.
Yeah, exactly. A process that tries to find a peaceful process to the conflict in general, in the east. And so the ball is in the Ukraine's side now, and of course, this is something very delicate because Ukraine and Russia have different interpretations of how that process should be, which steps should be taken first and second. So Russia wants elections first and then give access to the security forces of Ukraine or political forces to Ukraine after that. And Ukraine sees it the other way around. And Ukraine always is in fear that now Putin, if they get what they want, the way they want it, and the steps the way they want it, that he will continue to have a political hold in eastern Ukraine. So this is what the Ukrainians fear, and now I think it's also on the part of the international community, the Normandy format, especially those forces like Germany and France, but also the actors that are around this format, to closely go with Ukraine and Russia and try to negotiate and monitor what is happening, so that also Ukraine has the feeling that it's not dragged into something it doesn't really want.
Roman, one of the things that Germany has been trying to do to assuage some of the tensions is, in fact, to help restart talks on the Minsk agreement. As I mentioned, those had been stalled for some time. Together with France, it has now hosted 2 rounds of talks on this agreement that was attempting to restore stability in eastern Ukraine. But so far, the talks have not produced results, despite the fact that they met for, I think, over 9 hours recently. Now we've seen the Russian parliament saying that President Putin should recognize these self-proclaimed breakaway republics in the eastern part of the country. So tell me how you see it. Where do things go from here when it comes to the fighting in the east?
Well, I think we have kind of a pause at the moment with the tensions slightly decreasing, but not really. So we maybe have a few less tanks on the border, but then we don't know exactly. What we see is clear signals from Russia. Russia is pushing for Ukraine and for its Western partners to implement certain political steps, like the drafts of laws about election in the east of Ukraine, constitutional changes, and things which are very, very difficult for Ukraine to implement as long as there is still fighting in the east and as long as Ukraine doesn't control its border with Russia, which is very long, about 400 kilometers long or even more. So we are probably seeing an attempt by the Ukrainian President Zelensky in the coming weeks to present those laws to the parliament. We have to see what is in there and, which is even more important, on what conditions will those laws will be implemented or will come into force. And this is something which could lead to an implosion within Ukraine, to more protests of people who are opposing such laws. And this is, of course, something which will be will be met with pleasure in Moscow, because this will undermine Ukraine. But war is still an option, and I think the danger of a military conflict will only rise as we move to spring and summer.
Alexander, The Russian government spokesman actually discounted this appeal by the parliament, saying that wasn't actually in conformity with the Minsk agreement. Right. Do you nonetheless think that this is a step that we might see President Putin take to recognize these breakaway republics and thereby create facts on the ground in eastern Ukraine?
At the end, he may do it if what Mr. Roman has just said will not be implemented. At least partly, the Minsk agreement had to come into force. The Ukrainian side has to give some kind of autonomy to the breakaway republics. And if they will get this autonomy, then the process will go along. Then Russia will do also, from its part, certain steps in order to de-escalate the situation. And then there will be no recognition of the republics. In other way, it could.
Let me ask you this, stepping back to take a look at the bigger picture, not only in Ukraine, but elsewhere in the neighborhood. President Putin has demonstrated that a central goal for him is simply to destabilize, a kind of a divide and conquer approach, if you will. Now, clearly, in that sense, he was counting on tensions within the Western alliance as he took the current steps. But, in fact, as you said in your opening statement, NATO, the US, and Europe have been demonstrating a lot of unity. Do you think that's come as a surprise to Putin? Has it had any influence?
I don't think that there is so much unity, to be honestly. I think that we have two different positions to how to deal with Russia. There is a German and French approach of the old European, let's say it like that, who understand that the Russians also fear the NATO expansion, that there is something wrong also being made from the Western side. And they want serious mutual dialogue with Russia on strategic questions. And I think Germany and French, they were always lukewarm on NATO expansion. Remember the last 20 years, always lukewarm. The intention to expand NATO came from the United States and from the countries who wanted to join NATO, the new Europeans. The Americans and the Brits, they are not so economically intertwined with the Russian economy, with the Russian financial system, with gas, with energy. They don't care if there will be a complete breakdown of relations in economic sense between Russia and the European Union or the West. Germans and French care. The Brits and Americans do not. They want, from my point of view, firstly, punish Russia, stabilize its own understanding of the security system in Europe, mainly through NATO, so strengthening NATO, and ignore Russia's wishes or ultimatums, which will still to come.
Let me go to Roman and ask you whether you, as a Ukrainian, feel that the West, NATO, US, and Europe are doing what's needed to support you.
Well, I think the West is doing more than I would have expected just a few weeks ago. I mean, a delivery of weapons and heavy arms to Ukraine. This is something Ukraine has been asking for 8 years. And only now the West is delivering it. So I'm very surprised at that. But what I think is not enough is a diplomatic support. So I would like to see more Western leaders coming to Ukraine, showing solidarity. We've seen the President of France going there, who hasn't been to the Ukrainian capital, I think, for 20 years, maybe, if I'm correct. So this is a very good thing. Ukraine needs to see more of that. But of course, the West should think strategically, and by that I mean, when Putin says he doesn't want to see Ukraine joining NATO, the West, and especially the European Union, should think about taking Ukraine into the EU, because I think this is actually the only solution.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back to that. Regina, let me ask you this. The U.S. has long played the role of the world's policeman, ready to step in with force if things got too problematic. President Biden has made it clear that's not going to happen in Ukraine. So how far can diplomacy really take the U.S. and NATO if force isn't even on the table?
I think we have to deploy diplomacy. There's no way out of that, there is no, as you said, there's no intention to use force or to there's also no legal background that Article 5 of NATO could be raised or something.
There could, however, be a coalition of the willing were Russia to invade, thereby triggering the United Nations Charter, Chapter 7. If Russia were to invade, what do you think? How would the West respond? And as many of our viewers have been asking, one of them, Jameson Kennedy, put it like this: is there an actual chance of this escalating into a world war?
I think what the West is doing right now is preventing exactly this, that there will be an invasion in whole Ukraine. And that is why the West is aligning around itself so intensely, creating or showing rigor, showing unity, expressing its intentions on economic sanctions, massive political consequences, also security consequences, as we've seen already now. That
so I take it you don't see hot fighting. I'm interrupting because our time is running down.
Yeah, I don't see hard fighting. I think the way is to really prevent Putin from doing that.
Alexander, a number of our viewers are also asking how the Russian and Ukrainian people see it. Lynn Payne, for example, asks how Russian people outside Moscow feel and whether they're concerned for those in the army. Also, whether they think that what they think of Ukrainians protecting, as she says, what is theirs.
As I understand, no Russian and no Ukrainian want really a war between Russia and Ukraine. So even the top politicians in Russia are saying that they're against this war. So I exclude a war between Russia and Ukraine, a full-staged war. I exclude it. I think there will be more information wars, hybrid wars. This is possible. But nevertheless, there is a possibility of some kind of understanding. And remember, when we had this Crimea annexation and the crisis, you are talking about the possibility of war. This possibility existed already 7 years ago during the Ukrainian crisis 2014. What did Mrs. Merkel say? She said, after we are solving the crisis through the Minsk agreement, let's start talking about a joint Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok. She invited the Russians into a broader discussion on the European main issues. A common strategy, a common space for security in which all sides will guarantee the security aims and interests.
Mm-hmm. Roman, we have a similar question to you. Roman, sorry.
If you don't mind, just a short response to what Alexander has just said. He said no Russians or no Ukrainians want war. I'm monitoring Russian media and Russian social networks, and there are people there talking about war who say, let's go in, let's help Donbass, let's kick Ukrainian fascists, as they call them, out of Kiev, out of the Kiev government. So we don't know how many Russians think like that, probably less than 10%, but there are such people. And their voices are heard on state TV.
Let me also pass to you an audience question that we got from one of our YouTube viewers, Narina Limanov. She asks, how do ordinary Ukrainian people see this conflict and go about their daily lives?
Well, there are differences. Most people still can't believe that a big war is possible, so they are less concerned about that as we in the West, here in Germany or in the United States. But people who understand how dangerous the situation is, they are preparing, they are thinking what they will do, they will probably bring their families outside, they are getting ready. And they are ready to fight. This is something which I experienced as I was in Ukraine during the Maidan revolution in the year 2014. So people said we are ready to die for our freedom. And now such opinions are even more. You can hear that much more often.
Thank you very much. With very little time left, I want to come back to our title question, Putin's poker. everybody loses. All of you have made clear that this poker game is not only about Ukraine, but about NATO in general and about the security architecture for Europe. Now, Regina, you said in your opening statement that building a new security architecture for Europe that is equitable would be squaring the circle, meaning you think it's not feasible?
It's not feasible. It is feasible, but it will be really difficult because it goes beyond NATO-Russia relations, security relations. It is about the question, what kind of order do we want? It is about fixing the problems we already have in the security architecture, about erosion of arms control agreements and so on. So it's a real complex thing that will take a long time, but Putin wants quick fixes.
And Alexander, do you agree that everybody loses through this high-stakes poker currently being played, yes or no?
No. Everybody wins. Everybody wins because we will have a solution. You will see it. There will be no war.
Thank you very much. And thank you also to Roman in Bonn. I'm afraid our time is over. Thanks for all of our viewers as well.